On October 1st, I had a discussion or debate with one of the world's top skeptics named Mick West. Mick has been on the Joe Rogan podcast twice, and he's highly respected within the skeptical community. He graciously allowed me to upload the debate, and I'm going to show it to you, and I hope you enjoy. Here we go.
Welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Mick West. My guest today goes by the name UFO Jesus. And UFO Jesus is very interested in UFO disclosure. And we're going to start off talking about what UFO disclosure actually is. But first of all, welcome to the podcast, UFO Jesus.
Thank you, Mick. It's an honor to be on your show. I saw your show with Ian. I saw your show with Nick Pope, and I think you ask good questions and keep the show engaging, and I think you have a knack for interviewing people. That said, when you refer to me, I ask very kindly that you say UFO Jesus, because that's the proper way to reference my name going forward.
Interesting. Well, that's not the way I was brought up, but I will give it a go. Maybe I just won't refer to you at all.
No, I'm just joking.
That's fine. That's fine. No, it's cool. All right. So, yeah, I mentioned UFO disclosure. Now, obviously, like, you know, your big topic that you're always talking about is UFO disclosure. Can you explain to people what UFO disclosure means to you?
Okay. So different people have different definitions for UFO disclosure. I have my own definition. For me, UFO disclosure is when whether the United States government or another government releases an ample enough amount of data to which even the scientific community and the skeptical community has no choice but to acknowledge that UFOs are real, they're under intelligent control, and they're almost certainly not stemming from any military inventory in the world. So why don't they accept that now? Well, I think they're analyzing the data in a way that is not the most objective way, and that's why I think they don't accept it now. But I think that eventually the data will be so compelling that they'll have no choice but to accept it, and that's when we will reach a post-disclosure world.
That's a very succinct description. So the first thing you mentioned was that UFOs are real. Now, this is kind of, I think, kind of a little phrasing issue, because recently, like, the US Navy came out and they said that these 3 UFO videos that have been out there are real, actual videos of unidentified aerial phenomena. And people took this as saying that UFOs are real. Is that what you mean by UFOs are real?
No, what I mean, for example, let's go by the UFO gun camera videos that were released by the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. You know, what if David Fravor, the original video he saw? Now, I know there's people who don't believe David Fravor, and that's fine. Maybe you're right. But you know what? It's like when the dealer has a 5 and I have an 11, I'm going to double down. I think that David Fravor was telling the truth when he said that he saw a higher resolution video that showed appendages coming out of the object. But he also stated, and a lot of people have lost sight of this, in another interview, he said that when he saw the higher resolution video, that there was an instance when there was a close-up to the Tic Tac that objects were actually coming out of the Tic Tac. So there's 2 anomalous things that he recalls regarding the higher resolution video that we can't see because either they made the resolution lower or it's just been recorded over so many times that the resolution is lower. So if, for example, the U.S. government would have released the version of the gun camera video that Fravor saw, or at least allegedly saw, then it would force people to not be able to say, well, you know, it's just this blob on the screen and it could be this, it could be that. It would force people to acknowledge that, hey, that's not a blob. I can tell because the resolution is higher, and now I'm forced to look into this subject in a much more serious way. So that would be real, and there would be every indication that it is something that is not like an airplane or a hypersonic weapon or a missile. It's an unknown, a true unknown, and you have the resolution to make that clear.
Yeah, that would be great if we could see that video, but of course, unfortunately, we don't. So yeah, just fill everybody in who isn't familiar with these cases. Like we're talking about the was it from 2004, the Nimitz thing?
Yes, November. I think it was November 14th, 2004.
So there was this big kind of encounter that went on over a number of days. They kept getting all these like radar returns, and like I think people were reporting seeing these things off in the distance, and then eventually they sent out a jet to see what they were seeing on the radar. And when Commander Fravor got there, he was one of the pilots of one of the jets. He saw this Tic Tac shaped thing zipping around, and then it shot off.
Yes.
And then another jet went out and took video of this, and that video is what you're referring to, and what we see. It kind of got leaked out onto the internet somehow. I mean, it wasn't actually released by the U.S. government. It was actually it originally leaked somehow. Yeah, I think a lot of people might have seen it on the ship and copied it on the ship, so it's not clear how it got out. But yeah, that just shows a blob, which you can't really tell what it is. But yeah, it would be great if we could get that video. So, do you think that obviously you think that the U.S. government has this video?
Yes, I do. I would bet money on it.
Yeah. So, why do you think what's their rationale for not releasing the video?
There have been some think tanks. I don't remember the date. I think the Brookings think tank, and there might have been another one that were done by the U.S. government, I believe, asking them, would there be an advantage at all for any government in the world to release data that we are being visited by potentially extraterrestrials? And these think tanks who are not interested in UFOs, have no connection to like the disclosure industry, if you want to call it that, or anything like that. They basically said, look, there is zero advantage for any government to relay that we are being visited by extraterrestrials. We don't know what their intention is. We don't know whether they're hostile or not. By the way, they have a propensity to visit our nuclear installations, whether that's nuclear laboratories or ICBM silos, or even test sites where they blow these bombs up, and including battleship groups, because these aircraft carriers are nuclear powered. And so they do interact with our civilization, but we don't know what they're here for, and we don't know what their intention is. So I think governments, including the United States governments, but governments around the world, they don't want to open that can of worms up if they don't have to. And there might even be aspects of malleability of the populace. What is going to happen psychologically when civilization learns that not only are we being visited by something, maybe it's extraterrestrial, maybe it's something weirder, but I'll just call it I'll say extraterrestrials, anything that's not human. They don't know the impact that that's going to have upon civilization, and they just don't want to open up that can of worms. And then there's also, of course, there's national security issues, because if any government learns how to duplicate the technology that is being seen, whether from witnesses or from gun camera videos or from radar returns, there is, in my opinion, a silent race to back engineer this technology that enters airspace all over the world, and to bring this out into the open. Now you're bringing inquiry, and you're bringing journalism into it, and you're bringing world society into it. And if this really is something that if you crack, you have a military advantage over every other nation in the world. That would be another reason that the United States government is trepidatious in sharing this information. Not only that, I think they've known since the early 40s, and I think with the Cold War, yes, I believe that they've known about these visitations.
Do you think all of the governments around the world have known since the early 40s?
No, I would say that any government that has a very good Air Force probably knows, because within the span of time, maybe not the 40s, all of them, I don't know, but 40s, 50s, 60s, because I would say that there have probably been instances with any government that has a good Air Force where they have intercepted these objects, just as David Fravor intercepted them during the USS Nimitz UFO event series.
Yeah, so I guess that would be like in the 40s, you feel like there was a whole bunch of governments who knew that there were these UFOs, like the UK, the US, maybe Russia,
maybe 40s, maybe 50s.
Maybe
I'm not going to give an exact date, but yeah, I would go so far to say that it's an international conspiracy.
Yeah, I suppose.
And I will also go so far to say that sounds preposterous. And I totally understand skeptics who say, "Oh, come on, there's no way that this could be covered up by many modern nations." But those are the facts.
Well,
I mean, look.
Yeah. It's just I'm just trying to figure out what the timeline would be on this. Like, if it starts out that only, say, the America and the UK and Russia and maybe China knew about it, then how did the other countries, like, how do they get into the club? Like, say, India now has a fairly good air force, so surely India knows about it.
Data. They picked them up on radar. They may have gotten them on gun camera videos, gun cameras, and just data, basically.
Then all these countries, as they discover UFOs, they all decide that they're not going to tell anybody about them.
Correct, but you have to realize it's built into human psychology that they don't want to share it because, like I said, yeah, because there's okay, Mick. Let me ask you, what advantage do governments have? Now, let me finish my question. What advantage do governments have if they know we're being visited by an extraterrestrial race or races who have vehicles that may not be a threat, but if they wanted to, they could easily be a threat. They could take out every military in the world. We don't collectively know what their intention is. We don't know whether they're hostile or not. Just because they haven't blown up a aircraft carrier doesn't mean that something may not happen in the future. And do you really want civilization to have mass hysteria about it? What if the many instances where witnesses that worked at nuclear installations, security guards of nuclear installations, launch officers at nuclear installations. I mean, there is a hugely disproportional amount of sightings that have happened at nuclear laboratories, nuclear silo installations, places where they detonate these missiles that has no parallel. That's a fact. Now, we can debate all day long whether it's hallucinations or they're lying or whatever, but there is good luck making an argument that there's just as many UFO sightings at car factories and candy factories and this place and that place.
I don't really know the statistics on that, but
there's no correlation. And so putting that all into one place, what is the advantage for any government in the world to tell civilization that we're being visited, but we don't know what they're here for?
I could think of one advantage was that government would get to be first. They get to be the people who reveal to the world. They get to be the government that actually tells anybody. Like if it's a country like, I don't know, Japan, say, or even China, they get to tell everybody. And, they would actually get to tell them that everybody else has been covering it up. Because you've kind of got all these things, all these separate governments now, and they're all covering up aliens in their own way. And I guess they're not really cooperating. You don't think there's a worldwide conspiracy to do this? Because that wouldn't really work. I don't know if they're cooperating, but I just don't think they want to bring that information into the public discourse. So what would be the disadvantage? Can you think of any disadvantages? So obviously you're right. So like if China was the first nation to do it, they would have a legacy like no other legacy, and that would probably harm the interests of the United States. But can you think of any downside for say China or Russia disclosing? I don't. I mean, people talk about like there being mass panic and things like that, but I mean, would there really be? Because most people think that UFOs are real.
I don't think so, but I think governments tend to be paranoid too, and they come up with all these possibilities that might happen. Are they likely to happen? Who knows? But I think they tend to be paranoid. And I totally understand. I would not believe in UFOs if the evidence wasn't there. And I believe the evidence is there. Let's look at David Fravor. When the intercept happened in 2004, David Fravor had 16 years of experience as a pilot. He's a Top Gun graduate. At the time of the intercept, he had 3,600 flight hours. Before the intercept, he went to the Persian Gulf 5 times. He's flown over Africa. He's flown over Iraq, and so he's seen foreign planes. Mm-hmm. He's seen domestic planes, because when you're not in a shooting war, one of the things you do as a pilot for the Navy is you intercept planes coming towards the battle area and tell them to go the other way. At the time of the intercept, it wasn't just him that saw it. It was 4 aviators that saw it. According to Fravor, it was over 5 minutes that he saw it. It was caught on radar on the USS Nimitz, on the USS Princeton, which is an Aegis-class cruiser, and on the E-2 Hawkeye. So we have 3 separate radars, and all the radar operators say that all these tracks came up on their systems. And some people say, well, how do you know that it wasn't a glitch? Well, let me ask you this: if it was a glitch, how did they tell Fravor to go to a precise place, a vector?
Right.
And it was only when merge plot, which was when Fravor's plane and the contact are so close together that the radar operators cannot distinguish between the two. It was only at that point in time that Fravor and the 3 other aviators saw the object. Whoa. So if it was a glitch in the radar, how did that coincidence exactly occur?
That's a good question. But I think the answer probably is that that's the point at which he started looking for the object, because he would have been looking like down to the ocean. Like if it was, he would start looking for something. And because he had this heightened sense of like actually expecting something to be there when he did see something, well, no matter what it was, I mean, it's hard to tell if it was the same thing, then he fixated on that one thing. The problem is it's very difficult to tell like with these things, because we're really relying very, very much so on these eyewitness accounts. And it was a long time ago, 2004, so memories have changed. And there's discrepancies in the accounts, like the female pilot in the upper plane. She remembers, like, for example, the dispatcher being female when the other people say that the dispatcher was male. So it's kind of a small difference, but it shows that people don't have the same memories.
I'll take your word for that, but I will say this: there's always discrepancies, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you find any historical event that's true and that's corroborated and that the consensus agrees occurred, you're always going to find discrepancies. So I wouldn't use discrepancies as a way of discrediting the story, because discrepancies are always present, and no matter what, and you're dealing with a story that includes tens of people, maybe hundreds of people. Of course there's going to be discrepancies, but there's not enough discrepancies or severe enough discrepancies to discredit the story. So I don't think that would be a really prudent way to interpret the Nimitz case. Oh, there's a discrepancy, therefore I can just doubt the entire thing.
Well, how do you know what's a discrepancy and what's actually the reality? If Fravor's saying he saw this thing like zip-zapping around, the radar says that this thing went up and down. That's a discrepancy.
Well, do we know when the radar operators saw it go up and down? Because
we only have reports of them talking about it going up and down. We don't have reports of them actually moving horizontally.
But they've been tracking these for days prior to Fravor's intercept. So when you see a little soundbite of a radar operator saying it went from 80,000 feet, descended down to 28,000 feet, descended down to 50 feet, or whatever the exact quote would be, when you hear that soundbite, that doesn't necessarily mean they're referring to the 5 minutes in which Fravor intercepted the Tic Tac. That could be talking about the flight characteristics of the Tic Tac in general that encompasses days and days. Like I said, the intercept happened days and days after the radar operators first saw the Tic Tac and the flight characteristics of the Tic Tac.
They are very different things, though. I mean, Fravor's talking about it doing these rapid movements, and then he's talking about it doing this very, very fast horizontal movement, whereas the radar operators, they only talk about it like appearing at one point and then zipping down.
Well, they did say it showed up on the at his cap point very quickly, so that would
they didn't actually show it going there, though. They never actually talk about it actually moving horizontally. It just kind of seems to appear at little points here and there. Well, doesn't seem to match.
No, I don't think that's But you didn't see the radar returns. I mean, if you were to qualify that and talk to like Kevin Day and say, wait a minute, Kevin Day, did you actually see the object move at a fast pace when Fravor did, or were you just talking in generalities?
I did actually ask Kevin Day about that, and he said he couldn't remember it moving horizontally.
There you go.
But so that means we've got all these things. We've got 3 things here. We've got like the video, we've got the testimony of Fravor and the female pilot, and then we've got the testimony of the people who remember seeing radar. And I guess we've got testimony of people who remember seeing the video as well, which is kind of a different thing. But basically 3 things: video, eyewitness, and radar things. And they're all showing different things. Now, the radar's showing up and down and teleporting essentially. The video is showing something that doesn't really move and just seems to recede into the distance. And Fravor's showing these, talking about things that, first of all, like, zip around and then vanish off to the side or vanish off into the horizon, I think he said.
Well, Fravor said that, and so did the other aviators with him say that the encounter lasted for over 5 minutes. The video is actually only, 30 seconds? So obviously...
But the video isn't of the encounter.
That's true. That's true. But okay, you're right. So let me rephrase. What I'm trying to say is the object can move differently according to what it's doing at the current time. So maybe when Fravor saw it, it was acting a specific way, and then when Chad Underwood intercepted it, it was acting another way. I mean, that's not even implausible. If the object is capable of doing all kinds of maneuvers, why would we assume that the behaviors it demonstrated during the intercept with Fravor would be completely in equivalence with when Chad Underwood intercepted?
Sure, no,
I mean, that doesn't even happen with planes.
No, definitely. But you'd kind of, just to give more weight to the evidence, it would be a lot more convincing if it was doing the same thing in all three things. Like if we actually saw it to do something rapid in the video, and if it was actually, if we had radar tracks of it moving rapidly horizontally, but we don't. So we have to assume that instead of it being the same thing doing the same thing, it's the same object doing three different things, which is I think less convincing.
But even with the intercept with Fravor, the object did not always go at hypersonic speed. If you hear a story, basically Fravor and the wingman see it. The wingman stays high. Fravor descends and does, like, I believe, and maybe I get some of this off, but I'll do the best I can. He basically circles down very cautiously towards the object to get closer to it. So the wingman is not only 8,000 feet above Fravor, but is at a different angle, which only lends credibility to the fact that they actually saw what they said they saw, since since the testimony is equivalent and unanimous amongst all four of them, and two pilots saw it from one angle, two pilots saw it from another angle, and then the Tic Tac started mirroring, if I can say that word correctly, Fravor.
Yeah. And
so while the Tic Tac was mirroring Fravor, it wasn't going fast. It was just going at the same speed as the Tic Tac. So here is an incident, according to his witness testimony, in which the object is not moving at hypersonic speeds, and it's just doing exactly what an F-18 could do. So I don't see any discrepancy here. When the video that Chad Underwood got, the plane was just moving at a regular, or not the plane, the Tic Tac was just moving at a regular speed, a rate of speed comparable to a plane, just as Fravor's testimony is, in which when the Tic Tac was mirroring Fravor, it was going at Fravor's speed. So that emphasizes that the Tic Tac, according to the witness testimony, is capable of moving erratically, moving at hypersonic speeds or beyond hypersonic speeds, and just doing what F-18s do. So I don't see any discrepancy there whatsoever.
Sure, but it's just a shame that we don't actually have a correlation between multiple data sources. Like, I think you could argue, I guess, the top cover pilot is another data source in that she gave an account of it. But I have to say, I must kind of question her state of mind, which sounds a bit like I'm attacking the person there. But if you read her account, it's very dramatic, and she talks about how, first of all, she thought it was drug runners, and then she thought it was some kind of like 9/11 situation where she was going to have to use her plane as a weapon. So she's essentially thinking that she's going on some kind of suicide mission to ram some plane out of the air. And then, like, literally 3 seconds later, she thinks that it's some kind of search and rescue thing because there's a crashed plane in the ground. And then she starts seeing this object. So it seems like it could be some loss of situational awareness there on her part, and possibly on Fravor's part as well.
That is possible. I'm not persuaded by it, but I want to ask you a question, Mick. 2 questions to be exact. Sure. Number one, what is your best hypothesis on what the Tic Tac, or what the object was that Fravor, his WSO, and the 2 other aviators that saw the object was? And number 2, what are the odds? You could say, what are the odds that this is coming from an extraterrestrial source? Would you say would you say there's at least a 1% chance, or is it less, that this is coming from an extraterrestrial source? Those 2 questions.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think it's pretty hard to give odds, so I'm just going to start out with that one and say, you know, I couldn't really say like 1 in a million maybe, because it seems such like an unlikely thing to happen. But like my best guess as to what he saw, it's very hard to say. Like I think he might have seen multiple things. Like he might have seen, like, you know, he thinks he's seeing a white object. So, you know, white object's pretty featureless. So, like, you know, any white object in the distance looks, you know, the same as another white object if it's moving slowly, especially if it's like really far away and it's, you know, difficult to make out. So he might have been confusing multiple objects. Like he starts out seeing this disturbance in the ocean, like this, like you know, fish feeding or something like that, like a big kind of bubbling. So he could have been looking down, and perhaps, I don't know, like he just saw something that was floating in the water. Perhaps that later on that he saw something like a reflection in the canopy. You actually see tic-tac shaped reflections in the canopies, you know, the canopy that goes over the pilot's head. Because there's some circular things within the cockpit, and when the sun hits them just right, you get these reflections, which are kind of shaped, you know, like this. And, you know, and I hate to bring it up, but there would have been seagulls there. If you're looking down, and if there's a very, very large bird or something circling around for a moment, you could actually see a seagull. You know, it's a possibility. I know people mock the possibility, but we're talking about what Fravor saw. We're not talking about things on the video. And I don't think he would have just seen one seagull and then mistaken that for this whole thing. I think, you know, at some point, you think pilots, they wouldn't have eyes on something for 5 minutes. Like, you know, pilots have to actually do like instrument scans all the time. So they can't actually keep looking at something solidly for 5 minutes. So there'd be like some points where he's doing this thing where he's coming down, so when he first sees it, like, and then when he thinks that it shoots away. And, you know, I think it could have been a combination of things. Or it could be some kind of craft. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, and you know, I think what you think is extremely unlikely, but you know what? I mean, I think you're being totally honest, and you're giving your best objective assessment, so I don't fault you for it, but you know, it being a reflection or something far away, just I mean, he's in an F-18 Hornet. They can go like 1,100 miles an hour. You can put on his afterburners and be from point A to point B rather quickly. He saw it wasn't like something fleeting. He saw it for over 5 minutes, so he has this whole story wrapped around it. You know, if you were to look for a premium observer, like if you were to scour the earth looking for the best possible observer you could find, Fravor would probably be at the top of the list.
Maybe we'd have to test him. I mean, has anybody actually tested the quality of his observations? Well, of course, you'd expect him to be a very good observer. But now, you know, he's retired from the Air Force like 10 years ago, and now he works in the private sector. Like,
okay, but all 4 aviators are unanimous at what they saw. So your explanation has to fit the witness testimony of not just Fravor, but it has to also fit the witness testimony of Fravor's WSO. It has to fit the witness testimony of the 2 other aviators as well. And I'm just going to say right now, like, you know, to the audience, like, if you really think you really think Fravor and all 4 aviators for over 5 minutes, Fravor said he mirrored it. Fravor said that it noticed him and the nose turned up and started going in Fravor's direction. There's all these little details, but yet this can all be boiled down to some tiny object far in the distance. I mean, I just don't see a Navy pilot having this long, very detailed, very unambiguous story and actually engaging the object with one of the most premium fighter jets in the world that can travel very, very quickly. And yet it's a reflection, it's a glare, it's a little object. He was just disoriented. What am I seeing? There's a little tiny drone 3 miles away, but I'm pretending or I'm imagining that I'm engaging it, and this little drone is mirroring me, but it's really just a drone, but I think it's mirroring me. But then the other 2 aviators are seeing the same thing, but it's a little Cessna off in the distance, and then he sees a reflection, and I mean, no. Yeah. But go ahead.
I can see your point. And it is quite a compelling story. And I would really love to figure out what it was. But I don't think we can eliminate possibilities. Like you say absolutely no way but that just means I think that you put it down, you put it low on your list of possibilities.
I'll tell you my position. I don't have a problem with skeptics not believing the Tic Tac is, if they believe the Tic Tac is a 747 or a 737 or a drone, I have no problem with that. That's not my problem. My problem is skeptical orthodoxy, which I think you fall under the umbrella of, which is being so certain that it must not be something anomalous. It has to be something prosaic. So if you were to tell me UFO Jesus, I think there's a 1% chance it was extraterrestrial, I'd be like, I'm good with that. But you go well beyond that, even in the midst of all the witness testimony of 4 aviators, even in the midst of David Fravor saying he saw a higher resolution video where appendages were coming out. I mean, it's just basically, I think what's happening here is you are convinced that the odds are just exponentially low, that it's extraterrestrial, and therefore you interpret everything through that lens. But this is my question for you, Mick. Do you know enough about the universe to actually be able to ascertain what the odds are of whether it was of extraterrestrial origin or not?
You really can't like put odds on things like that because there's so many variables that we don't actually know. Like, and I'm sure you're familiar with stuff like the Drake equation and the Fermi paradox and things like that. Things that talk about what are the probabilities of there being intelligent life in the universe, but it tells you nothing about what the probability of intelligent life actually visiting this universe is.
So we don't know.
Yeah, so we
don't know. So you're not justified to be so certain that it's not extraterrestrial.
Right.
All we have to go off of is the data in the witness testimony. And I'll say this to the scientists out there and to the skeptics out there, this is what I would ask of you to do, and myself, by the way, is to petition the United States government to give over the data. Because look, if the data's not there, fine. But I think there's been enough corroboration and enough people have come forward, Top Gun pilots, Top Gun radar operators, that I think it justifies not just taking what the government gives us and leaving it there. I think what is taking place currently and the escalation in this subject has justified that maybe all of us should just demand the U.S. government to give us more data. And they could say no, but at least ask for it. And I think that would be a very constructive thing for everyone to do.
I would be happy. I'm a big fan of open government, so I'd like to do that.
There we go.
Yeah, I'd like to.
It's on my team.
Obviously, like, you laugh at me suggesting that Fravor could be mistaken in his thing, but like, I think
I'm not laughing at you. Like, I think you're being, I think you're being objective in your own, like, that's what you believe, and I'm saying what I believe. So maybe I'm wrong. I'm not saying it's possible I'm not wrong. I'm just calling it the way I see it, and I think your interpretation of the data is hilarious. But who knows? Maybe you're right.
There's a few of the reasons why.
Lunatic conspiracy theorist, everyone. I mean, UFO Jesus. What do I know?
No, I'm not saying that's at all. But there's a couple of points I want to bring up about that, like why I think that. One of which is that it happened in 2004. Why didn't Fravor ever draw a diagram of what he saw?
I don't know. Why is that so? Like a diagram, like right after it took place, you mean?
No, at any time. He's never, to my knowledge, drawn a diagram of what he saw. Like, he can say, like, I was here and it did this. It gives a verbal description. Now, if we had little diagrams, we could actually start to try to correlate all the different recollections. Like, we've got the female pilot at the top, and we've got Fravor down below. She says some things. Now, in her report that with her interview with Elizondo, it actually says in the report that she drew a diagram of that encounter. Where is that diagram? Why didn't they show that diagram? If we want to try to correlate eyewitness recollections, have them all draw diagrams of what they saw and see if what they recall happening actually matches. Fravor's just told this story over and over again. Why can't he actually describe what he saw from his point of view? Where was it exactly in the cockpit? Were you looking down? We don't know, like, how do you actually see something if it's just this 30-foot wide thing and you're above this boiling water or whatever? It doesn't really seem to make sense as to how he could actually see it. And the female pilot describes it zipping across the area of disturbance, but that doesn't really make sense either when you actually kind of figure out where she is. She's up at like, 20,000 feet or something, and then this is supposedly at 5,000 feet, and it's moving over an area that she described as being about, I think, 100 feet, and it was only 30 feet wide, so it would, it zipping over this area wouldn't really make sense. But if you could actually have these people draw diagrams of these things, we could try to see, what's the actual 3D reconstruction of this. Now, that people have tried to do 3D reconstructions. I think there's Dave Beatty did one, and
the Nimitz Encounters on YouTube. Check it out.
Yeah, but didn't like Fravor call it like a cartoon and say it should have been taken down?
He did.
So, he did. I mean, like, what was wrong with it? What actually was the 3D position of everything in his thing, and why can't it be reconstructed from what he said? Is his description actually a good description of what happened, and what's the difference? So I have all these problems with it.
Well, I don't think that compromises the likelihood he's telling the truth. But on the other hand, yes, it would be helpful if he drew a diagram of it. I agree with that.
Yeah, but if everybody gives different diagrams, would that change your opinion?
You mean like all the aviators?
Yeah.
If there was a consistency between them, no. If they were completely different, yes. Because I would imagine that the diagrams would just be a representation of what they said took place. Yeah, so I don't see why they would be so different from what they've already stated on the record.
Yeah, so my hypothesis obviously would be that they did all kind of see different things because they were all looking out, and there's lots of white things in the air, like obviously, like we laugh about seagulls because like there's these memes about seagulls being UFOs and weather balloons, obviously. But there are white things, and so describing something as like a white tic tac shaped thing kind of encompasses a whole bunch of possibilities. So I really would like to actually talk to the various people. I actually emailed the female pilot asking her to talk to me, but she never responded. And I haven't emailed Fravor, but I don't have his email address. But it's an open invitation to anybody, any of the 4 people who actually saw this encounter up close, to why don't we work and try to figure out if everybody saw the same thing and what was the actual 3D path of this object based on your recollection. What was wrong with Dave's reconstruction? So that would be a good thing to do. And I'm not. I do put the UFO hypothesis very low. Partly because I think the description of it that we're talking about here is that it has this hypersonic velocity component. Like it moves from 28,000 feet to 50 feet in 500 feet in 0.15 seconds or something like that. Something ridiculous. It would
less than a second. Yeah,
do 100 Gs basically. Yeah, and I think if that type of thing actually existed, it would. Well, for a start, it would have given a much bigger bang when it actually happened. It would have been an incredibly loud thing to happen, unless you had some kind of magic way of dealing with that, which, of course, who knows. But essentially, these are appeals to magic, which is kind of like a thing all skeptics don't like. In that,
I understand that, but I would disagree.
High technology.
I think that first of all, so the universe is. How old is the universe? I'm drawing a blank.
It's 16 billion, I think.
Okay, 16 billion years old. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So if there's let's say there's I think 200 to 400 million stars in the Milky Way. There's an estimated 100 billion planets in the Milky Way, and there's an estimated 50 million planets that can sustain life. So out of those 50 million planets, if just one of those planets had the building blocks of life and evolution started developing, let's say 500,000 years prior to when evolution started on Earth, that would mean there would be a civilization that has been doing science and has been technological for 500,000 years more than planet Earth. So
maybe.
I don't see. Okay, potentially. So I don't see why we should doubt the potentiality for civilizations that's been around for hundreds of thousands of years longer than us to do things that don't make sense to our current understanding of physics. So I don't really see that as a big obstacle the way that you do.
Well, have you done the math though? Like when you say like you think it's probable, have you actually worked out a probability? Would you say like how often would you expect aliens to visit Earth?
Well, I mean, I go off the data. I mean, there's a UFO historical record that goes back 72 years, and I do believe the radar data is out there. They don't release the radar data, obviously, but I believe it's out there. You know, Fravor, interestingly, when he was at some event with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, he said that when he saw the radar tape that was on Chad Underwood's plane, that he remembers it the way that people remember where they were on 9/11, because it was because
that's interesting though, because a lot of people remember that incorrectly. When you actually, it's a classic case in false memory syndrome, and if you ask people where they were on 9/11, a good percentage of them, I think at least 10% of them, will actually misremember it. And they've done studies in this, and you can actually go back and like say, where were you on 9/11? And say, oh, I remember it as clear as day. I was watching it on TV. Or people will say things like, people say things like, even like, I saw the first plane hit the tower on TV when it was never on TV, because they think they remember it. But people saying things that they remember things like 9/11, they actually are kind of a red flag. Something is burned in your memory. That doesn't mean that you remember it very well. It means that you've kind of gone over it and you've re-remembered it and cemented it and perhaps added new memories to it. It's a real thing.
Okay, well, look, anything's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible you misremembered it, but I wouldn't place my bet there if it was me. But I want to. You asked Ian in an interview before, Nick Pope, an interesting question. You said, "Have you ever seen a UFO?" So I'd like to answer that question. I have never seen a UFO, but I will say this: I've had two instances where I saw an object that I thought might have been a UFO. One was it was very bright, but then I thought about it for a little bit. I did a little research, and I'm like, nope, that's Venus. I was surprised at how bright it was, but it was Venus. Another one was out on the beach, walking at night, and I saw what looked like 3 red lights forming a triangle. So a red light at each apex of the triangle. And I thought about it, and I said, wait a minute, nah, I don't think it's a triangle, because it could just be lights positioned on an airplane where it appears triangular, but there's nothing really beyond that. And the reason I bring this up is because I think skeptics overplay their hand when it comes to their estimation of how fallible human beings can be in relaying what they saw, because I don't think the fallibility of human beings is infinite. I actually think there is it's finite. So yeah, if you get 100 people who say they saw a UFO, a certain percentage of them are going to be lying, a certain percentage of them are going to be making things up, a certain percentage of them are going to have a predilection to fantasy. But I think even just scientifically, if they were to somehow, I'm not a scientist, but if you were to set up an experiment to determine how good people are at remembering, how good people are at deciphering what they see, I actually think science would be in my favor. So the reason I bring this up is because I don't feel like I'm this amazingly astute person, because I look up in the sky all the time, and I've never been tricked. I've never been deceived. I've never had a fantasy or any of that. So I'm thinking to myself, why am I so much better than all these people that goes back over the 72 years, and I don't have all these stories? And even if I were to think I saw a UFO, it would be so mundane, because the really interesting UFO stories like the Belgium wave that I think happened in the late 80s, which is one of the things that they say they saw, and it's like a pattern. I think there was like 2,000 witnesses that came forward, and most of them say they saw the same thing, which is a triangle with 3 spotlights at the apex of the triangle and a bright red light in the center. And even sometimes the bright red light would descend from the triangle, do some things, come back and return to the triangle. There's one incident where there were 2 police officers. They saw a triangle, and the spotlights on the triangle were so bright in the middle of the night that they could read a newspaper. And I'm just thinking to myself, how are so many people having these unambiguous relays of information about what they saw? Yet I look up at the sky all the time, and I've never even seen anything even remotely capturing anything even 1/10 as interesting as that.
Right. Well, I mean, you probably haven't seen a ghost either.
No, no, I
No,
haven't.
but there's lots of people who have, and they give very good accounts of them, and they're often very, very similar. Like people will describe things that are very, very similar, like the ghost appearing in the bedroom as they're falling asleep, or the ghost being of a dead person that they knew once. And so, if you think that all these people are seeing ghosts, is that the same type of thing as the UFO thing? Because we got all these eyewitnesses, or say angels. We have lots of people saying that they had an encounter with an angel. Is that the same standard of evidence? Because lots and lots of people give the same story, does that mean it's the same thing?
I would make a distinction between the two, just because they don't have ghosts aren't picked up on radar. I don't hear radar operators talking about ghosts. I don't hear Top Gun pilots intercepting ghosts.
Well, maybe some of the UFOs are actually ghosts.
But I don't rule out ghosts. I mean, we don't know that much about our universe, right? I mean, you said it yourself. I think in a past interview, you said that our civilization technologically is only 100 years. What if we develop better technology where we can pick up things that we thought at one point never existed? I mean, who knows?
Sure. But my point is, we don't have any evidence whatsoever that ghosts exists. But we do have all these ghost photos, and we have all these eyewitness accounts, but a lot of people will say that UFOs are real, but ghosts are just silly nonsense. I mean, are you putting them on the same level here? You think that the likelihood of ghosts is the same as the likelihood of alien visitors?
Objectively, no, I can't do that, because with ghosts, as far as I know, the primary medium of evidence is witness testimony. Where with UFOs, there's plenty of stories where radar picked these objects up. There's stories of ground traces, like in the Rendlesham Forest incident. That's highly corroborated. There's a lot of documents covering it. I think there were ground traces where the vehicle landed. So no, I think there's a big distinction between ghosts and UFOs. And also, not only that, but I mean, ghosts suggest that consciousness survives death. Now, my personal beliefs are irrelevant. So one has to ask the question: what evidence do we have that consciousness survives death? Probably not that overly compelling. There might be some, but probably not that overly compelling. But we know that human beings exist on this planet, and we know that evolution is real. So it's really not a fair comparison, because we can extrapolate from our existence here, from everything we see, and say, well, maybe it exists on other planets, and therefore there are other entities from other planets visiting us. So it's I would say it's not even on the same ballpark, in my opinion.
It's kind of an abstract discussion, but I mean, I think when you bring up evidence, you got to say, are there other things that have similar levels of evidence? But yeah, no, you could definitely argue that there's a possibility of life out there, whereas if you look at science, I suppose there isn't a possibility of life after death. But then some people would argue that there is a possibility scientific. So yeah, who knows? Our science isn't very advanced, so maybe, as you said, that maybe we'll discover future that these ghosts are actually real.
You don't think that's a compelling argument? I want to get your point on that. So you don't think it's a compelling argument for a vehicle that has no sonic boom yet travels at obscene speeds? You don't think it's a compelling argument that there is a very plausible possibility that a civilization that's tens of thousands of years ahead of us figured out a way to travel at high rates of speed without a sonic boom? You don't think that's a very
I think it's far more likely that humans actually figured it out, because we know humans exist and that they have technology, and that they're always trying to advance technology, and going very, very fast is something they want to do. So maybe if they discover some kind of atmosphere warping device, then that would be something that people would do. But alien visitors, sure, if alien visitors were here, then yeah, that would be something that they would have, perhaps fast moving craft. But the idea that alien visitors are here doesn't really seem to have any evidence to me.
Okay, well, let's put it all on the table, and we'll see what happens. I mean, if you're wrong, I'll be the first one to say, you know what, my analysis stunk, and Mick was right, and I'm totally fine with that.
Well, I'm sure we both have valid points. I mean, you obviously, my explanations of what Fravor saw are very piecemeal and somewhat ridiculous, perhaps. But I also think that his story isn't quite as solid as you make out.
Well, let me put it this way. I asked myself, And like neither of us have a mathematical equation to prove our point. So we're really just making judgment calls if we're being honest. And if you disagree with that, tell me how you come to your conclusion. I'd be very interested in hearing it. But ultimately, we are literally just making judgment calls. So you look at what happened in Fravor and you say, it's very unlikely that he actually saw something that wasn't prosaic. I look at it and say, no, I think it's likely that he saw something that wasn't prosaic. There's no mathematical equations being thrown into this conversation. You are literally just asserting your opinion, and there's no equations, there's no science, there's no nothing. It's just your opinion, and I'm doing the same. So it's like, that's the best we can do right now, I guess. I mean, I don't think your analysis is good, but maybe you're right, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm totally okay with that.
But I suppose you could throw some numbers out there. Like, we do actually know that people make mistakes all the time, and people make up stories all the time, and people have false memories all the time, and so we know that happens literally millions of times, if not billions of times a year to some degree. And we know that combinations of things happen. And occasionally these combinations of things line up. So we know occasionally there's going to be this situation where two people think they saw the same thing even though they didn't. That will inevitably happen at some point, and perhaps it happens all the time. Now, I think that's something where you could say that the law of large numbers means that extraordinary things eventually happened. Maybe this was just an extraordinary set of coincidences, because this is just the one really good example that we have. It seems very unlikely, because it was very unlikely that he would happen to, his line of sight would fall on this particularly large seagull and then a reflection in his canopy. Sounds ridiculous, but ridiculous things happen. Somebody wins the lottery every year. There's lots of lotteries every year, and someone gets these 100 million to 1 odds and they actually win it. So extraordinary things are bound to happen all the time. This might have been just one of the more extraordinary ones.
Well, I'll just say this: if ridiculous and extraordinary things happen all the time, it's interesting how they have this manifestation happens to love UFOs, because it seems to happen all the time with witness testimony and UFOs. I'm kind of surprised that people aren't seeing monsters and all kinds of weird creatures. Sure, Bigfoot, but Bigfoot's like, okay, now UFOs are seen, I would say, much more often than Bigfoot.
Really? Have you checked that? Because there's quite a few reports of Bigfoot. There's Bigfoot sightings in every state in the country, including Florida. Every single state has a Bigfoot sighting. So it's not like just like this couple of guys. There's actually lots and lots of Bigfoot sightings, and I'm sure. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but a lot of people will laugh at Bigfoot and say there's no evidence, but there's also tens of thousands of sightings of Bigfoot.
So I want to ask you this, Mick. So if it comes a point where the U.S. government and other governments start releasing so much data that we know there's no longer a debate about UFOs, that they're under intelligent control, they're not from any military inventory in the world, and that's proven, and to your satisfaction, will you reevaluate witness testimony when it comes to UFOs in the past? In other words, will you look at the historical record of going back 72 years and start to see and start to maybe assess, witness, corroborate it? Not just one guy who was in the forest and drank too many beers, but corroborate witness testimony. Will you assess it differently in light of government's giving you enough evidence so that now whoa, UFOs are real? Yeah,
I think what you would do then is you would look to see those individual cases of recollections and see, does that match what the information that we have now? Like if the government says that, oh yes, we admit that there are, whatever, like the craft that can move at Mach 10 or 200 Gs or something like that. Does that information corroborate, whatever these people are talking about? Like if eyewitnesses are saying, I saw this thing move at 1,000 miles an hour or whatever, then these things would match. So perhaps.
So if the U.S. government showed like one of the crafts these extraterrestrials used were like triangles with 3 spotlights and a red light in the center,
that would be great.
Then when you heard other witnesses going back 72 years relaying that same architecture, then you would give more credibility to that if you knew that was one of the vehicles extraterrestrials worked. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. I think that particular thing, the triangles with the red light in the middle, it's very like a plane. I mean, you must admit that it's a common configuration that planes will have some kind of triangle of lights, and they have a red one in the middle, and you see it all the time. I'm sure you've seen it. Generally, they look pretty small in the sky. But
I would be on board with you if there wasn't so many incidents where it was highly corroborated, and police officers and people that are credible are all seeing the same thing. If that wasn't part of the equation, I'd be on board with you. And you're like, these are one-offs.
I would be on board with you if there were some, say, time-lapse photographs. Why don't people take, sure, it's difficult to take a photograph of the sky, but if there's something moving that's got like 3 white lights and 1 red light, and you got to do is take a long exposure, and you get three white and 1 red streaks across the sky. It seems like if there's all these thousands of sightings of the same thing, by now someone would have taken at least a shaky photograph. I suppose there are
maybe they have.
Yeah,
and skeptics have looked at it and said, no, this is not just in the same way that they look at the FLIR 1 video. Maybe they just have the same sort of assessment. Oh no, this is not a real photo. I'll tell you why, X, Y, Z. Now I would say this: if it gets, here's another question I have for you, Mick. If it gets proven to your satisfaction and it just becomes the consensus of rational people everywhere that the object that was videotaped with the FLIR 1 video and the object that was videotaped with the gimbal video, those are unidentified and not from any military inventory in the world, that becomes a consensus. Will you reassess maybe that you in this, let me put it this way, will you conclude that in the same way you say that all these witnesses, like people win the lottery and ridiculous things happen all the time, maybe could it be that another ridiculous thing that happened was that you were convinced by looking at the 3 videos that was released by the Navy, and yet even with all of your arguments that from your standpoint are compelling, they actually ended up not really being relevant to the truth? Will you make that realization if that happens?
Ooh, I'm not sure I really follow your logic there.
So in other words, if the gimbal video and the FLIR 1 video end up getting proven to display something that's not coming from any military inventory in the world, it may be extraterrestrial. If that gets proven, will you reassess your capabilities at analyzing video data?
Sure, but I'm always doing that. And I think it would actually depend on how it was proven. Because if it's proven in a way that shows that I was wrong, I would be very, very interested in that. And so I would obviously have to figure out where I did wrong. My background is I'm a game programmer. And game programmers spend a lot of time, if not like more than half their time, debugging their games. So you're playing the game like, the guy like walks through a wall or something, and you have to figure out why that happened. So my brain has been hardwired over the last 30 years to figure out why something happened. And so that's why I'm really interested in looking at these UFO videos and figuring out what's going on. And if someone was to say, oh, now we have proof that's generally accepted that this gimbal video actually shows a flying saucer on its side, then I would be like, well, show me this. I want to see what this is. And I would be really, really interested in figuring out what it actually was and hearing more evidence.
And I believe that, because I do think you're pursuing the truth. I think you're pursuing the truth the best you can. And like I said, if you end up being right and I'm wrong, great. I'll buy you dinner.
We shall see. We shall see. Don't we have a bet on?
Yes, we do. We do have a bet. The bet is that I bet at you was that it was a while ago. So I think there's like 3 years and maybe 1 month remaining. I betted you that there would be a head of state either from I don't know what
like
we
G8 and China.
In Russia.
And Russia, yes.
Yeah, that a head of state would state that something to the effect of UFOs are real. It's on Twitter. I don't remember the exact language.
No, I have a link to it. I put it on my calendar, on my Google Calendar for 5 years in the future, and so I'll fingers crossed. Yeah. We'll see what happens.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, but I think it's got to be something more than just simply saying this video is real type real. It's got to be actually like you were saying earlier, that there's real evidence that it's not human or whatever, not normal technology.
Right.
All right. Well, this has been very interesting.
I do it before we
sure. Yeah.
No. I want to make a prophecy, if you don't mind.
No, that's why you use your namesake's powers.
My name is UFO Jesus, and I have a 6-part prophecy.
Whoa.
Number 1, we will have disclosure within 6 years. Number 2, within the next couple years, new UFO programs will come to light, and it will be established that ATIP was not the first UFO program, or it was not the only UFO program within the United States government, and that these new UFO programs were much more well-funded than ATIP. Number 3, more evidence will be released that increases the odds that some UFOs are not from here. And number 4, there will be an escalation in the media that's going to continue with UFOs meandering into the mainstream. So this is not going to fizzle out. UFOs are going to be, so the president has been briefed, the Navy has admitted UFOs are real, Congress has been briefed. That's only the beginning. It's going to continue to escalate into the coming years. Number 5, many books will be written about how skeptics and scientists approached the UFO issue, had a lot to be desired, and I'm putting that nicely. And number 6, disclosure will lead to many scientific breakthroughs that will significantly help humankind. Those are my 6 prophecies on Mick West's amazing podcast, and I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you very much.
No, that's great. That's great. You actually finished that exactly on 1 hour. So I must admit to being a bit of a doubting Thomas when it comes to your prophecies, but of course,
what is okay? I want to get this. What's the likelihood that any of my prophecies will come to pass?
I would put a lot of money against it.
All right.
I think perhaps the one with the more UFO programs, that's entirely plausible. Because obviously the Navy wants to figure out what these UFOs are. If there are if things are going into their airspace and there's a problem, so at least one of your prophecies will come true, I think.
Okay. All right.
But,
great.
Not all of them. I would bet, I don't know, 100 to 1 against.
Okay. All right.
Right. Well, thank you very much. It's like people can see you on YouTube on UFO Jesus?
Just look for UFO Jesus or Post Disclosure World. Either do a search on YouTube for either of them, and I'll pop up. And I thank you for subscribing to my channel.
All right. Great. Well, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting discussion. Thanks
a lot, Mick. It was fun. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts. Link is in the description below, or you could even become a patron. Or you can just slap a like on this bad boy, and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.